What we put in our bodies, what we choose to buy in the store, it's wrapped into our identity now. We're starting to see the pressure that this increasingly, urban consumer can really exert on our producers.
Especially these days when there's so much controversy about many nutritional issues and many farming issues. People are confused, they're bewildered, they don't know who to listen to, who is correct. Relatively, until recent times, until 70, 80 years ago, 70% of the population was somehow involved in farming. Today, it's less than 2%. 2% of the population is providing the fantastic amount of food that we enjoy. Well, that obviously had to come about with some innovations in technology.
There's concern about GMOs, about genetically modified organisms, mostly because people don't really understand what they are. And certainly there is concern in regards to the use of pesticides, whether they be insecticides or herbicides or fungicides, in that I think consumers in a lot of ways sort of don't understand why they're necessary. There are very few emotions that humans have that really make us want to act, and fear, that's one of them. If we're reading things, and especially as a mom, or if you're making decisions for your family, and you see something that's alarming, it's natural, I think, to want to err on the side of caution.
A lot of the activists, who promote what I consider are illegitimate fears about our food, do it very well. You have to give them begrudging respect for their activism. They come out with very romanticized arguments, not scientifically based, but very, very compelling.
Things like the anti-GMO movement or the move to, regulating pesticides. It is an incredibly large and powerful group. With every sort of added regulation or policy that gets put into place based on consumer concerns as opposed to scientific concerns, we run the risk of moving towards the point where the practicality component gets taken out entirely. What we have is good. We're doing good things. What is really important to me is where this technology is going to take us. Things like using less water to produce the same yield, using less nitrogen to produce the same yield. These are the sort of traits that I think resonate with consumers.
So I think it's very important to point out to people the difference between scientific knowledge and hearsay and emotion and the all-knowing they say. Well, who is the they? It is not the people who are doing the legitimate research in that area. We
live in a world of very quick snippets of Facebook posts and Twitter handles and 140 characters and tight headlines, and we skim, we don't really read, we don't necessarily think super critically or question where the information's coming from all the time. There are things that pop up on my feed that I really want to say, did you even look where this came from before you hit share?
And I think it's our job in the scientific community to try to counter that, to instruct people on how we in the scientific realm really know what we know. Why should we be believed when we say that concerns about genetic modification, concerns about pesticide residues are overblown, whereas many of the activists maintain that we're inundated with disease and that we are confronting a cancer epidemic, etc. Why is it that isn't really correct, and why should they believe what we say? And I think the basic answer to that is how we know what we know. And what we know really relies on the scientific literature. It relies on what we refer to as the peer-reviewed scientific literature, whereby a scientist will do some kind of study, submit it to a journal. The journal will send it out to experts in the field who then evaluate it and determine whether or not it deems to be published. That's quite different from looking at the Huffington Post or looking at the National Enquirer, or in fact looking at any newspaper, where they are not as meticulous about looking at where the information comes from.
I grew up on a farm. It was all I ever wanted to do. I love animals. I love plants. I'm fascinated by how they all work together and how there's nothing simple about any of it. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I wanted to work with farmers. So ag journalism has become sort of farming by proxy. I get to chase down anything I find interesting. The farmers I know that I get to work with, that I have the pleasure of working with, are incredibly passionate. These are people that, you know, are just so down to earth and so connected with what they do. Just because someone is a conventional farmer doesn't mean they're not also an environmentalist. It doesn't mean that a farmer doesn't also worry about the safety of the food that they feed their family. Farmers are also consumers. They make choices in the grocery store just like we do, just like their customers do.
So whenever we look at concerns that people have about modern farming, you have to look at the other side, about what it has allowed us to have, is this vast food supply.
We don't necessarily get that reality check of what it really takes to have avocados in the grocery store 12 months out of the year. The average consumer wants to buy fresh vegetables and lovely produce and, you know, the meat that they choose and all these sorts of wonderful things. They want them to be available, but they don't always think about what it took to get them there.
My feeling always has been that high school students should be made to spend 2 weeks on a farm. And then they would realize, you know, how difficult it is to grow food. And you know, how you have to worry about weather conditions, and a 30-second hailstorm can destroy your crop for the year, and you know what difficulties farmers face.
If you walk into a grocery store, you can see the very real impact of what a consumer demand can do. And you walk in now and they've gone to sort of a farmer kind of farmer's market food stand sort of look. There's large splashy, you know, be well and make great choices and eat healthy and eat organic. It's everywhere. Now, organic actually has a whole certification system behind it, but we've got all sorts of labels that don't, and they're just marketing.
Of course, there is the romanticized idea that a small farm somehow produces better quality food than what is possible to do on quote, industrial farms today. Well, how do you evaluate that? The only way to evaluate it is based upon the chemistry of the food. You take a look at that pea or that apple that is grown on the small farm. You take a look at the other and see, is there any chemical difference? The fact is that there isn't, because what you're looking at are different production methods, but that doesn't result in a different final product. This is not to decry the fact that organic agriculture can't work. It can on a limited basis, but it's not going to feed 10 billion people who will be coming to dinner by 2050. We have the luxury of worrying about trivia here, certainly in North America, because we don't have to worry where our food supply comes from. So we worry instead about traces of pesticide residues in that food supply. So we need to have, the proper perspective.
We, as a North American or European very wealthy society, are sort of saying, we want this purist ideal, and we really could stop this technology from helping the very people that it really needs to help, those that live in countries that are not self-sufficient, that they don't have food security. And so it's a very, I think it's coming from a place of incredible wealth and privilege to blindly sort of be putting this pressure and digging our heels in on some of this technology that really has phenomenal potential to do so many wonderful things.
Today, thanks to farmers, it is possible to eat better than anyone has ever eaten in history.
The family farm, a tradition in Canada going back 200 years. This canola farm has been in the family for 3 generations. Today's farmers face the same challenges as their forefathers: weather, soil fertility, pests, commodity prices. But today's farm is radically different from the romantic ideal.